Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2015 American Express Boot Camp series of Google Hangouts. We're happy to have you. My name is Dennis Whittle. I used to be executive chairman of Ashoka Changemakers. Now I'm the director of something called Feedback Labs here in Washington, D.C. We have a fabulous group of panelists today. I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, let me tell you just a little bit about what this Hangout is going to cover today. And we're looking forward to your inputs. I think there'll be a way in the Google Hangouts that you can send in your questions. We have moderators that will put those up in front of the panelists. But let me just set the scene a little bit. The world of work is changing dramatically. For many of us who began working 30 years ago, we entered an apprenticeship system where people who were older and smarter than we were hired us, made us come and sit behind a desk and not say anything for 5 years, and then if you behaved well enough, you gradually got given more responsibility. Many of us joined organizations and stayed there for 15, 20, even 30 years. A lot of the people I joined the workforce with in the mid-'80s are still at the same organizations. But the world is changing dramatically, very dramatically. And we're going to hear from many panelists today about how the workplace is changing, how the workforce is changing, and how we ought to think about matching the two. So we're going to be talking about things like how has the economy changed within the past decade or so, and why, what factors are involved in the shift of skills, 21st century skills that are needed, and how do you attract those skills if you're a company? How do you attract and then retain those skills? So that's the kind of high level of what we'll be discussing. And without any further ado, I'm just going to go around and ask some of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. First, let me start with Andy Rapista, who is coming to us from the Philippines, from Quezon City outside of Manila. Andy.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Andy Rapista. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Watson Institute Philippines. We are an incubator program for young social entrepreneurs, for student leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs, and we empower youth to create solutions to the world's toughest challenges.
Fabulous. Thank you, Andy. Ariana, are you there? Ariana? Ariana, maybe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariana Unai, coming in from San Francisco. I work at LinkedIn, and I'm a relationship manager as well as chair of the board here at LinkedIn for Good. My role at LinkedIn is centered around helping nonprofit organizations leverage LinkedIn to find the best talent to ultimately make them successful. My role on the board is to provide strategic direction to LinkedIn for Good social impact programs, and part of my responsibilities are sourcing new board members whose talents, skills, knowledge, their networks align strategically with what we're looking to achieve. So looking forward to joining you all today and providing a bit of color as to how I partner with nonprofits to find the best talent.
That's great. And Ariana, it's hard to imagine anybody who would see more data and information about how the workplace is changing than LinkedIn. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. Rodney, let's go to you.
Hello, folks. How are you? I'm Rodney Fuller. I'm Executive Director of Public Allies New York. So obviously I'm coming to you from New York, and Public Allies is a 20-year-old not-for-profit that focuses on talent development, and we operate an apprenticeship program that goes for 10 months, places young people ages 17 and up in not-for-profit organizations where they learn on the job, and very often at the end of that 10 months are hired on by the organization, as well as getting money for college to pay for loans going backwards or for school going forward. So glad to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you, Rodney. And Eric?
Hi, everybody. Absolutely a pleasure to be here as well. And to give some context, I'm the president and founder of Watson University, which is a new university model for next-generation social entrepreneurs. So our goal is to provide the next generation of change makers with a university experience that allows them to incubate their ideas and, as we say, protect their courage as they go out and make change through training, mentorship, connections to partners and peers. We're based in Boulder, Colorado. We run a degree program and a semester program there. and Andy and I work closely together. To provide some clarity there, Watson University is the degree program in Boulder, and then Watson Institute is a summer program in the Philippines that Andy leads.
Fabulous. And our second Eric Termuende. How do you pronounce your last name, Eric? Termuende. Go ahead.
Thanks for having me. My name is Eric Termuende, and I'm co-founder and director of Gen Y Inc. We're a cultural consultancy based in Canada, and what we're looking to do is help organizations become future ready. And so what we've done is we've created a cultural diagnostic tool where we can quantify components of culture, analyze that culture, and look to attract people based on fit, as opposed to a brand or a salary attraction. So when we look at the future of work, how are we bringing people into the workforce? How are we keeping them longer? When we're seeing the tenure of a millennial to be 2 years now, how do we really mitigate those retention problems and reduce the cost of recruiting as a result?
Great, great. Well, I think that covers our panel, and as I hope you'll agree, we have a fabulous depth and breadth of experience on this topic. So, Eric, why don't we stay with you and tell us a little bit about, you said we were moving away from recruiting based on brand and salary to something else, and you know that's so provocative because, again, I'll go back to the introduction. When I joined the World Bank in the mid-1980s, that's what I was attracted to, was brand, prestige, and salary. I stayed there for 14 years. Many of my colleagues are still there, 30-some years. So what's going on? Why? Tell us how people are different now.
Well, we've seen this shift, and I think a large component of this shift is towards a social component, a community component to work. You know, with rampant increase in technology, education being more prominent now than it's ever been before, there's an awareness component that I think didn't exist in previous decades, just because there is so much information flying around so quickly. When that awareness component is so high and information is so readily available for organizations, individuals that are moving into the workforce now have the ability to understand in depth what an organization is really about, how they're giving back to their communities, and what impact they're making in the society as well. And so I think that when we're looking at fit, just because education is higher than it's been before, people have the opportunity to understand better how is this organization going to fit better my needs, but also how am I going to give back to that organization who's really making a difference in my community as well. And I think that's a bit of a change and a bit of a shift from what we've seen in the past.
That's great. And Ariana, maybe I'll ask you to follow up a little bit on that. And it reminds me, Eric, what you're saying, about 5 years ago or so, someone from a giant engineering firm was in my office, and he said he was having trouble recruiting. And I said, why? He said, all these young kids, they want to know what good we're doing in the world. And he said, we're building bridges, we're building highways. For God's sake, people are, this is obvious what we're doing, and yet we can't show them that it's actually doing good in the world. So it is that signaled to me a new day. The guy was very frustrated. Let's go over to you, Ariana, and tell us about LinkedIn for Good, and is that drawing on the same observations, or is it different? Or tell us what it looks like from your perspective.
Sure. So LinkedIn for Good, I think a lot of it is predicated upon the fact that our employees making social impact part of their identity and part of who they are as a professional is what ultimately makes them feel more tied to the company and more proud to speak about LinkedIn. And I think a lot of that comes down to how purpose-driven an organization is. So LinkedIn's vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. So I would argue that in their day jobs, every LinkedIn employee, whether or not they've participated in a volunteering event or they even understand what LinkedIn for Good is, does feel that connection to what the company is looking to achieve because it's so purpose-driven. So I'd absolutely agree with Eric that having that social impact part of your identity fulfilled is a big reason why a lot of our employees feel proud to work here and what keeps them going every day, because they feel so aligned with our vision and what we're looking to achieve as a company. And I think a second facet about about the way that the workforce is changing is the emphasis on skills. And so you'll see a lot of these trends start to materialize in the evolution of the LinkedIn profile. So adding skills to your profile, being endorsed for your skills, having those highlighted, those are all things that recruiters look for. And the more skilled you are and the more that you can share about the specific skill set that you've acquired through your work or things that you do outside of work, even if they include your volunteering causes that you care about, are all incredibly important for recruiters when they're looking to find the best talent for their organizations.
That's great. And Andy, is this, let's go to you in the Philippines, is this just an American phenomenon? Is this just something we're seeing in Silicon Valley and Boulder, Colorado, and places like that? Or what are you seeing in Manila, or even more broadly in Southeast Asia?
There's definitely a lot of growth in Southeast Asia. The Philippines in particular has been named the social entrepreneurship capital of Southeast Asia. And I think that's really interesting because it's still in somewhat in infancy, but there are a lot of social entrepreneurs. It's one of the biggest careers that people want to go into now. So in terms of young people, I think for our generation, we definitely want to look more at meaning and purpose-driven impact careers. So it's really exciting to see we have ventures like, we have other incubators like Idea Space that really want to grow the science and technology space, and social enterprises like Rags to Riches that are becoming more known globally. They've become Forbes 30 under 30. So it's really interesting to see that people, as young people especially, are getting inspired. I think that's something to be said, especially coming from a developing country, and young people are becoming more empowered to really become change agents in their community and really adopt the Ashoka motto of everyone a change maker and everyone a leader.
Well, and one of the things, Eric, I think you said early on, is the speed at which information is flowing and awareness. And I guess that's embodied a little bit in the collaboration between the Watson Institute and Watson University in Boulder. Can you tell us a little bit how that came about, Andy and Eric?
I think I can maybe let Eric take this one.
Okay, go ahead, Eric.
Sounds good. Definitely jump in as well, but I think, yeah, one of the things that really inspired Watson was realizing that, you know, one of the key systems that needs to change with this generation that is looking for different work, is looking to engage with the world in a different way, is the education system. As we've learned from many people at Ashoka, including Henry DeCio, this is a new game that we're playing in. And right now, education is really preparing people for the old game. And so students graduate, and I think one of the most common things we find in the millennial generation is they graduate and they do something that is completely out of line with whatever their major was. So the question is, well, why did they major in that? And couldn't there be a university path or an educational path that's more aligned with what they're going to do afterwards? And so we created Watson to provide that path within the education system for young change makers, so that instead of graduating and then learning kind of everything we need to know to go out and make the change that we are driven to create, we can actually have intentional training and mentorship while we're still within school to do so. And the hypothesis is that will then accelerate and increase the impact of this generation because they get to start earlier. And Andy, do you want to speak some about maybe how the Philippines got started as well?
Yeah, so just to give a little background, thank you for explaining, Eric. Just to give a little background, I moved to the States when I was 17 from Manila, from the Philippines, and you know, like a typical young idealist, I knew that I wanted to change the world, but I had no idea how. I was going to community college and I was studying liberal arts, but I felt like I wasn't learning anything that I could apply in the real world. So instead I started doing internships, and I found out I worked at Ashoka U and Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, and while I was there I fell in love with entrepreneurship. I fell in love with social entrepreneurship because I felt like it was something that taught people a sense of self-agency, and I felt like gave people a sense of dignity and pride in the work that they're doing and changing their communities. So when I found out about Watson, I applied, and it was the perfect place because finally I could actually directly apply what I was learning immediately after the classroom. I had really, really good relationships with a lot of the mentors and master course teachers that Eric has provided, that Watson University has provided, and also just the perfect kind of culture and community that I feel like young people like me are looking for. In most universities, you're in a classroom with 300 to 400 people. You never really get to have deep conversations with your professors or your classmates. And at Watson, it's very small. We're only about 15 to 20 people, so you get to form really deep relationships. And especially in the world of social entrepreneurship, we're veering off the typical path of going into, I guess, a for-profit job, and that's really scary. And me especially, that we're only about a year old, and there's something special about being able to talk to master course teachers like Henry DeCio or Jerry White, or leaders in the nonprofit sector that have so much wisdom. And it's the perfect place for me, I think, and it's a really great place, especially for young people that want to learn how to immediately do something and apply things. And you have this amazing community of young people that you can turn. I think that's what young people really need these days.
Eric, at Gen Y, let me go back to something that the other Eric, sure. mentioned, which Henry DeCio mentioned, which is that people are being trained for a game that's out of date, or there's a new game, but people are doing drills for the outdated game.
Sure.
Does that resonate with what you're seeing? And
yeah, I was speaking to a friend in medicine the other day, and he told me that the information that we know about medicine doubles every 4 years. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. And so if that applies to medicine, which of course is such a huge body of knowledge that's been developed for of course thousands of years, what does that speak to education, or what does that speak to the way that we're working, or what does that speak to technology? And I think that when we listen to Andy speak about her job, she doesn't really talk about the day-to-day. She doesn't really talk about the skills that she has or how she applies them. She talks about the emotion. She talks about the experience. She talks about what she feels when she's at work. And I think that is a perfect example of how we're speaking to culture, and we're speaking to feeling, we're speaking to emotion when it comes to being at work. And I know that with myself and my peers, when I talk about work, I'm not talking about what I do at work or how I do it. I'm talking about why we do it and how it makes a difference. And I think that resonates across a generation, and something that's being looked at a little bit different, which also speaks to your point about the engineering comment a few years ago. All of us know, of course, based on what we're doing, what happens and what the process is and what that really means. But now, how do we showcase the individual within that job to talk about what they're doing? So I think when it comes to storytelling, how do we tell a story about the individual as opposed to the product? So the purpose before the product, but at the same time we can talk about the product because of the purpose, because of the individual that we're featuring within it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, the person before the product. And I wonder how much of this is generational versus things are changing in general. And Ariane, I don't know if you have any insights based on your work at LinkedIn. Is everyone starting to feel this way, or is it the old fogies, kind of like me, that are still living in the old world, and you have to sort of segment your market in terms of recruiting employees? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think I don't have a perfectly scientific answer to this. It's more anecdotal, and I can speak to personal experience. I know starting at LinkedIn, I came from a political economy background. That's what I studied in college, and now what I do has nothing to do with that. But I was inspired by LinkedIn's vision. I'm inspired by the work I do every day because it resonates more deeply with purpose and with feeling like I'm really driving something bigger than myself. And I've read studies, and I've seen this. It's particularly prevalent across people from my generation. Though I think it probably depends on the company you're at. I think it depends on, I guess, how long you've been in the job market. And from what we're seeing on our end, this is something that is more heavily weighted toward the younger generation.
And are you seeing geographic differences? Is this a sort of Palo Alto, Boulder, Manila, New York phenomenon, or is it what are you seeing there?
Yeah, probably in these major cities where this is starting to become more and more of a trend. Definitely San Francisco, New York, Austin. So some of the bigger tech hubs where purpose-driven social impact initiatives and making that a bigger part of what you do in your day-to-day is becoming something people are talking about more, telling stories around those companies need to also be looking at finding that type of talent, and ensuring that that talent is aware that they're an organization or a company that is focused on that. And I think a lot of that comes down to understanding which markets you're in and how to adapt your what we call your employer brand or your talent brand accordingly when telling that story to potential talent.
Well, let's switch to the other side of the equation now. It's you mentioned you mentioned, Ariana, that you were a political economy major. I'm sure others. I'm actually kind of interested in hearing what others majored in college, because it's think about your job now. You actually have a lot of technical work that you have to get done, things you didn't learn in school. And presumably you're at LinkedIn because you're good at some technical skills, not necessarily coding, but you go to work and you get things done. Someone told me the other day, this reminds me of the old major that we had in the 70s or 80s. We started having these majors like interdisciplinary studies or whatever that basically taught people nothing. And they'd go into the workforce and they had no skills whatsoever. And it was all kind of groovy, but it wasn't helpful to the actual workplace. So I'm throwing this out there to all.
Hi everyone, it looks like we briefly lost our moderator. In addition to Andy, does anyone want to jump into the last topic?
Eric, did you have any thoughts?
I was wondering if it makes sense to take a question from some of the people listening, if we can. It looks like we just got Dennis back.
Great. So while Dennis is getting back into it, so we do actually have a question. I'll jump in very briefly. So we actually do have a question from Jonathan Ng at Ashoka, who's basically Ashoka's legal guru, aka counsel. So here's the question. I'm curious what you all think about it. How important is it for us to use common language when describing the skills needed for the new workplace? Are we simply using different language to describe the same concepts, or are there meaningful nuances?
I can take a stab at that for sure. I think that when we're talking about skills, of course, there needs to be a common language, just because skills is that hard asset that you need to have. The question that I would ask in return is do we have a skills gap or do we have a communications gap? And I think that when we're talking about something deeper than skills, when we're talking about that passion and experience, I think we need to articulate the value of the people within an organization in a different way depending on what demographic we're talking to. And so an example of this is we often see organizations say, how do we attract millennials, or how do we engage millennials? And of course, the conversation isn't limited to millennials, but for the sake of this example, I think that's what I want to focus on. In Canada, 7.5 million people are millennials. That populates over 20% of the population. So my question in return then is, how do you possibly put a generation in a bucket and try to appeal to everyone in one foul swoop? So how do we then articulate skills or experiences or passion to an 18 to 25-year-old female as opposed to a 45 to 55-year-old male who may be in different departments, who may be having different experiences, who maybe have been in the country a different amount of time. So I think that when we're looking at the skills needed, there has to be a common language, but what you do with those skills and what value those skills would bring to not only you but to the organization has to be communicated a little bit differently.
That's great. And sorry I dropped off there. This is Dennis. I'm back on, and I so I didn't hear the full question. I'm looking at Jonathan's question. Jonathan's a lawyer, and if there's one thing lawyers need to do, it's proofread things and focus on detail. And I don't know if that was part of John's question, but I remember talking to John a year or two ago, and he was frustrated because some people had sent him a contract and they just hadn't paid attention to detail. They consider that trivial proofreading, but it was actually very substantive. So, Jonathan, I appreciate that question, and that sort of brings me back to a theme I wanted to keep pushing on a little bit is aptitude as well as attitude. And it's great to have people who are gung-ho in organizations, but if they can't get work done, it doesn't help anybody. So you may have discussed that when I fell off the air, but I didn't hear the answer, so I'm kind of interested in people's reflections on how do you do work to a very high technical standard while at the same time having the right attitude. Is that coming up in your classes and your recruiting and your training?
I can jump in here. I think one of the things that we've really noticed from employers is that more important than any specific skill is someone's ability to problem solve and work with a team. So, and I don't know if this is a function of the world today that didn't exist before, or if this has kind of always been the case for a few generations, but the skills that are needed on the job tend to be so specific and so unique to that niche that some of those aptitude skills can really only be learned on the job. And so the important skills for someone to come in with are the teamwork, the leadership, the ability to solve problems and think on your feet, to work really well with partners and other people. And one of our mentors, Bernard Amadei, who started Engineers Without Borders, always refers to these skills as the top bar of the T. So, you know, you have the vertical bar of the T, which are deep skills into a specific industry, like engineering of different kinds, for example. And Bernard, who's an engineer, believes that the role that education should play to prepare, you know, millennials to join the workforce is, rather than focusing so deeply on those vertical skills, to focus on the top bar of the T skills. Things like empathy, things like creativity, things like teamwork and leadership, because across the board you're going to need to learn these skills. And like Eric said, if the amount we know about medicine is, you know, doubled in the last 4 years, I believe was a stat, well, it's hard for med schools to keep up with this. So a lot of those very specific skills need to be learned on the job, but some of those top bar of the T skills you can really learn. And I think in terms of hiring millennial employees, the employers that I've spoken to, and speaking from personal experience, I look way more for the top bar of the T skills than the hard technical skills.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Two of the themes that I'm hearing time and time again in working with recruiting organizations at nonprofits and also understanding the way that LinkedIn tries to identify the best talent are, one, hiring for potential, and two, hiring for cultural fit. And I think that really does tie a lot to what Eric and Eric were saying about the way that the talent market is evolving. If we're hiring for those two things, what we're noticing in the trends is people feeling like you've invested in them, and thus have the confidence and the energy to perform above what's expected. And then secondly, cultural fit, and ensuring that who you're hiring resonates with your culture and values as a company, ensures that those people will stay with the organization longer. So we see attrition rates go down, cost per hire eventually go down. And so the most strategic organizations I'm working with are focusing on those two themes when looking for the right talent, versus focusing on purely deep experience in those hard skills.
And those two, again, that they focus on were which? The culture and the...
Hiring for potential.
Hiring for potential. And say a little bit more about that. How do you, what does that mean, hiring for potential?
Yeah, so I had never heard the way of describing it of the T-bar. So I think that would be the things that you can't really teach a person. So when I'm thinking about interviewing people for our team or potentially interviewing people for our board, what we're really looking for is not necessarily individuals who've had direct experience with something, but who show the aptitude and the hunger for becoming proficient in a certain skill or at the job that you're hiring for. Those things can be a little bit difficult to assess. I think it takes some time cultivating a relationship with that particular candidate, understanding what drives them, what motivates them, and the background they have is both professionally, educationally, and then also as a person that might be proxies or indicators of their true potential as a professional. Those are softer, more squishy things to evaluate, but I'd argue that looking for those in an interview process or in building a relationship with a potential candidate are more important than having them explain to you their past work experience and how their skills directly relate to the job at hand.
It sounds like even just doing the interview is quite a skill. It's an art, not a science, and you don't do it by just looking at what they say on paper. Somehow you have to interact with them maybe several times. Do you think that have you seen organizations, including LinkedIn, that have figured out how to do that? I personally, I'm not good at that, so I'm looking for advice here.
Sure. Yeah, it's tough. I think one key to it is having a diverse panel of interviewers. So obviously, I would never be the only person interviewing a potential candidate. I'd love to get the perspectives of multiple people on my teams, ideally cross-functionally. So individuals not just coming, for example, from the sales organization, but potentially from engineering, potentially from LinkedIn for Good, or whatever other departments, to be able to provide multiple perspectives, and then having that interview process at least have two to three different phases. While that can be lengthy and be more time up front, when you think about the benefits in terms of the ultimate cost and time saved over time by hiring the right person versus just getting someone quickly in the door, that becomes just absolutely game changing. And I think another concept that we'll probably, hopefully we'll come back to is this, the difference between passive talent and active talent. Oftentimes we find that the majority of the job market is comprised of passive talent. So people like me and everyone else on this panel, gainfully employed, but potentially opportunistic. And so I think this ties to sort of that approach to hiring that's longer term versus just getting an active candidate in the door because you have a seat to fill. So the question then becomes, how do you efficiently hire the best passive talent and active talent, but specifically around that longer term conversation and getting to know someone over time?
Yeah, the same guy who was complaining about people asking him what the meaning was of building bridges, he told me some pretty shocking figures about how much it costs every time they lose somebody. This is an engineering firm, and I can't quite remember the numbers, but it was somewhere on the order of $250,000 to recruit and train up a new person, and that was pretty shocking. That really, I'd always heard about the importance of retaining your good talent, but boy, that was a dose of hard reality when he told me it cost that much to replace someone. So he was really looking for ways to retain people. You've taken it a step further and said we got to find the right people to begin with and then retain them, and both of those can be very, very costly. So
I think if I can just jump in there, Dennis, very quickly, a line that we often use is that engagement and retention really starts before the job does. And unless we can really articulate the values of the organization to the individual that's coming into that position, then we can't possibly expect to keep them for a long period of time. But at the same time, in fact,
and how do you do that? Further. So let's say, almost.
I'm not sure if it was just me that lost.
When a candidate comes in,
Sorry, do you mind just saying that one more time? I just lost you for a second.
Did we lose?
Are we here? We're here, yeah. Can everyone else hear me just fine?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Dennis's question, we might all be losing him, or maybe it's me, but his question was around how we go about doing that. And I think it then goes back to looking at culture from the components that contribute to it. And I think a large problem that's happening right now is that organizations are viewing culture as a binary topic, where we can either just fix culture or showcase culture or improve culture by looking at culture as one entity. And I think that that's kind of a really common mistake that's happening right now. And so what our suggestion is, and what we've done when we developed our cultural diagnostic tool, is we've taken culture and we've broken it down into 16 different themes, things that would include attraction, retention, engagement, branding, innovation, creativity, drive, mastery, purpose, sustainability, aesthetics, and atmosphere. We look at diversity within the workplace as well. And when we break culture down into these components and we start to understand the components as individual entities that contribute to culture, then we can look to showcase components of culture to the right people and ask the right people the right questions for the right reasons. And so if we can break culture down into these components and have culture be almost an aggregate of the components that feed into it, then I think we can start telling the stories of the intricacies of the organization that really appeal to the individual that's looking to fill that position. Are there any other comments, agree or disagree?
I would just second that and emphasize, I think, how important culture is when it comes to hiring millennial talent. I think, you know, millennials look for culture as much as anything else when they're figuring out who to go to, whether that's an institution to study at or whether that's a job to begin working at. And so, just like Eric said, identifying and knowing that culture is hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I fully agree. And I think one of the big problems here is that, again, the generations are being put in buckets and saying, how do we generalize generation? I think generalization is the most dangerous thing that we can do when attracting new talent. And you know, if we were able to break down those generalizations, I mean, I'll just use my family for example. Other than living under the same roof for a few years and then sharing the same last name, our hobbies, values, interests vary significantly. And so if we're trying to generalize a generation that may be comprised of millions of people, I think we have to be able to break down those generations and really speak to the individual as opposed to a generation as a whole.
I guess I could add to that in terms of being a new talent and being in the age range of people who are fresh graduates, is that something that we also look for apart from culture is the capacity for growth. So knowing, if I were applying for a job, am I going to be working for someone who inspires me, who I can have honest and vulnerable conversations with about how can I grow in this field? I think sometimes a big fear that young people have in terms of joining nonprofits or social enterprises is that there isn't a lot of room for growth or promotion, but I think that's kind of a myth that we need to debunk, because especially with early stage enterprises and young people that join them, is that it's essentially like an MBA for us, the same way Watson Institute is like an MBA for me, because I have to wear so many different hats. I have to learn how to fundraise, I have to learn how to build partnerships and build stakeholders, I have to learn how to manage a project and at the same time build a team. So it goes from idea to scale, and when you get to be part of that kind of organization, there's a huge amount of space for growth, and at the same time you also learn a lot about culture, because when you're part of a new organization you get to really set the tone and create what your culture looks like.
Welcome back, Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know where I dropped off or what words of wisdom you imparted after I left.
If I were to summarize in a couple sentences, what I was saying is speak to the individual, not to a generation. Generalizations are extremely dangerous. Culture is an aggregate of its components, and to be able to identify the components of culture is key when articulating and leveraging the values of an individual organization and the people within it.
That's great. So it's not about brochures that address a broad market, but about individual.
I just think it's kind of laughable when we see a career tab that says, you know, welcome to an open, vibrant culture. We've got an open door policy, and you can speak to your superiors, and you've got infinite potential for growth. I think, you know, oh, that's great, but at the same time, that really doesn't tell us anything about the organization or your experience.
Yeah, sometimes you get the feeling that when you see things like that, the opposite is likely to be true.
Absolutely, and how do we know? We're taught to be desensitized now to advertisement like this. So again, I think if we can talk about the individuals and the people within it and showcase these individuals, that those testimonials become real and those experiences become real, and they can articulate that value to attract someone with similar values, maybe in that same demographic.
Yeah, and that is based on specific interactions. Ariana, I maybe 12 years ago, I was at LinkedIn office when it was really small, and I was talking to there were not that many people there, and I remember Reed coming in and kind of challenging a few people on various things in a really good way, and he sort of blasted them for something they were thinking about, and then he quickly engaged them in a conversation about what would work, what didn't. And in the course of 20 minutes just watching this, I thought, wow, this is kind of a cool place to work, where people really talk about the real issues. The CEO just kind of bursts in, or the founder just kind of bursts in here and wants to brainstorm. The person I was with had some answers, and they made progress right on the spot. And it really, just witnessing that interaction made so much more of an impression on me than anything I had read about any company before. And it just speaks to the point of the individual interactions. Let me read a question that's come in from Victoria. I'm a young person interested in social entrepreneurship, just about the early stage that Andy was. How do I identify the right institutions that will allow me to nurture the skills as well as start work on my social business? Anybody have thoughts on that? Shifting gears here.
I'm still very much in the beginning of it. But what do you mean? Yeah, what should your first job be right out of college?
Yeah, and she says, I'm not
what
interested in more theoretical stuff. I already have a master's degree, but I want something hands-on. What should I do? Who should I work for?
Go ahead and fit that really aligns with your what, how, and why. I think that's the best way to learn, is to just dig deep. Find a mentor that you want to work with, or find an organization that you want to learn from, and figure out how to help grow it.
I'd add to that one thing I wish that someone had told me earlier on in my career was, when you're going through an interview process, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. And so go into any organization that you're considering understanding with a strong level of self-awareness. I really like the way that Andy put it. I believe he said the what, the how, and the why. The way that I've thought about it is identity, experience, and skills. So what really ties to your core as a person? What skills do you want to gain? And then really the why. What experience do you want to get? And I think a big component of that as well is understanding the team you'd be working on and who you'd be working under. And so use the interview process as an opportunity to, like I said, interview them as much as they're interviewing you, to understand if it's a good fit.
And how can you do that without being obnoxious? Or just, it used to be in the olden days when I went in for interviews, that we were kind of supplicants, and we just hoped that we got hired, and we didn't say too much because we didn't want to be seen as presumptuous and arrogant. So how can you strike that balance between asking the right questions but not seeming like you're entitled?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple ways to evaluate it. The first is without directly doing it, so listening to the types of questions they're asking you, and having that form the basis, or helping you understand through the questions they're asking you, what are they really looking for? What is this organization really about? Why do they care about my answers to these questions? Are they trying to see the way I think through things? Is this person presenting a challenging question because there are hard problems to solve at this organization, and that's something that excites me. And then I think always take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions almost in any interview. If you're looking for something really tactical, they'll always say, do you have any questions at the end? Always have questions ready. It's kind of a no-brainer. And I think those questions can be centered around, tell me a little bit more about the types of project your team is taking on. How do you interact with your peers and getting projects off the ground? Just asking for more concrete examples, and I think you can absolutely do that in a way that doesn't come off as obnoxious. Instead, comes off as curious. And I would argue that it's probably a very strong quality for interviewers to see that you're asking questions that are trying to get at what the organization is really about. It's not offensive. It's just a way for you to show that you're interested in what they're doing, and your questions are a vehicle for better understanding that in a short interview time frame.
Right, so it can be a positive that you're curious. It's the type of skills you would need on the job, the type of attitude and aptitude, both they want people to have on the job. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Andy, I think you were about to say something and I interrupted you.
Sorry, you were choppy. Or were you referring to me?
Yes, I think you were talking and I cut you off. So.
Okay, so I think me, especially because I'm starting out, this is only our first year, and we're looking to scale now, is that in terms of looking for the types of people that I would hire, I definitely want someone that is willing to help come up with a strategy. Someone that's not going to come to me with a problem, but instead, hey, someone that can say, hey, these are 3 strategies that we can use to help solve this problem. I think there's definitely a big value in being an entrepreneur, and I really like what Henry Jacia, one of our master course teachers, taught us, is to constantly step into your bigness. I really appreciate your question about being obnoxious. That definitely was something that I was worried about when I was applying for internships while I was in college. But now that I'm hiring someone, maybe I kind of want someone that's a little obnoxious. It's because as a founder of an organization, you want someone that cares about your baby as much as you do. And you can kind of tell that someone cares about it if they're asking maybe questions that might sound obnoxious, but really it could be that they're just really passionate and they want to find out more about the organization. I appreciate people that ask questions, like what are your biggest challenges and how can I make myself the most useful? In terms of asking questions, I think it's really important to ask what is your vision? What's your personal goal? Maybe as the founder of the organization, but also where do you see my role maybe in the next coming years, and also having a very, very deep understanding of yourself when you're applying somewhere and how you want to grow as well. What specific skills do you want to take away, and what specific contribution do you want to leave in an organization?
That's great. Very interesting balance there between stepping into your bigness, as Henry says, versus being obnoxious. And I like how you said when you're a founder, you want people to step in. You need people to step into the bigness of what you're doing. And someone told me the other day, when I'm interviewing people in a startup, I listen carefully for the pronoun they use. If they use you, I don't like it. If they use we, I like it. And so it's almost finding people that will step into our bigness, or the broader bigness. So, Eric at Boulder, I have a question for you from Brian Chisoli. He says, how do we change the generational culture of hiring graduates based on educational prowess to talent, especially since we're at a time when universities are pumping thousands of students into the labor market and there are mismatched skills? So I think Brian expects you to solve this problem single-handedly. So
no, I think it's a
strategy.
That's the perfect question for sure. I think there are definitely still jobs that require that require those skills that universities are pumping graduates out into. So I hesitate to kind of speak across the board here, but can kind of only speak from where Watson is coming from and why we're doing what we're doing, which is that, we always say Watson is not for everyone, but for the type of students that we work with, we're a much better fit for them because we're really designed for next generation change makers. Now, my hypothesis is that we need a whole lot of models that are kind of the equivalent to Watson in different fields and different industries. So Clayton Christensen, who is a kind of one of the leading thinkers on innovation and helped pioneer this field of disruptive innovation, wrote a book called The Innovative University about where higher education is going. And so I think my main recommendation would be for Ryan, I believe your name was, to go pick up the book, check that out, because it really does a good job of describing where universities can go in the future. And what it says specifically is that in the past, every university has kind of been on a track to try to become Harvard or Stanford or Princeton or Yale, an Ivy League, basically. And so whether it's University of Colorado or you know, another liberal arts school, or there's this kind of unidirectional path that every university is on, and Clayton Christensen's point is, going forward, that doesn't make sense. Rather, universities should try to really understand what makes them unique and what niche they can be the best in. And so in Watson's case, you know, our goal is definitely not to be an Ivy League. Our goal is to be the best model for next generation social entrepreneurs. So that if you're a next generation social entrepreneur, it would make sense to go to Watson over other institutions because we're absolutely tailored for you. But if you're on another track, the ideal would be is if you could go and then choose that university. So it's kind of this model where instead of a unidirectional path for all universities, there's a whole lot of subsets of focus areas within the higher education system that serve the next generation across the board as best as possible, regardless of interest area.
Very interesting. Yeah, Clay Christensen is a fabulous writer, and I'll just reiterate Eric's recommendation. The name of the book again, Eric?
It's called The Innovative University.
Innovative University, yeah. I can imagine that must be fantastic. So, let me ask a follow-up to that. Something I've always wondered is these skills and attributes that everybody's talking about, can they really be taught? And how much of the coursework you're seeing is aspirational versus effective? And how do you know whether you're being effective or not in terms of teaching things like leadership or teamwork or whatever? You can do a lot of exercises that feel good, but how do you know if it's working?
That's a great question. Does someone else want to start besides me?
I can take a quick shot at that. I think that when we're being educated, and transitioning into the workplace, there are three fundamental questions that need to be asked of the individual. And I think that right now only two of those questions are being asked. The second question is, what are you going to do? And the third question is, what are you going to do to get there? So what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? I think the first question that's missing, and the most foundational question of all, is what do you really value? And so if I were to be a fourth-year university student, the question is, you know, what are you going to do after school? Okay, so great, now how are you going to do it? But I think that when we're looking at high school education moving into post-secondary, very rarely are we asked, what do you value and why do you value that? And I think value is different than passion, because you can be passionate about something, but at the really core value, we've got, you know, of course we've got practices, we've got norms, and then we've got values at the really core of who you are. If we understand what we value and why we value that, then we can start to answer what we want to do as a result of what we value, and then how we're going to make that happen. And so I think that when we're looking at skills, of course, we have the skills, and we can identify fairly quickly what those skills are. But how do those skills really translate into added value to what we really are passionate about and what we're going to do as a next step? And I think that if I were to transition that very quickly into the workforce side of things, when we're looking at recruiting, we're looking at attracting talent, often the organization will say, okay, well, what do we need to do, and then how are we going to do it? But failing to ask first, who are we and how do we contribute to what we want to do and how we're going to do it? And I think that when we're in these interviews, that the questions that we can ask are more along the lines of the values of the organization, knowing what skills we need to do well at the job. And so I think that if we can add those two questions, one on the corporate side or one on even the nonprofit or philanthropic side, and one on the educational side, that we can make better decisions about what careers we want to go into and ask the right questions as a result to really succeed in those positions.
That's great. So start with what you value. Is that the key here?
I would say so, and have that conversation start as early as possible, and keep and keep that conversation live throughout the high school and post-secondary.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly not a conversation that we had when I was in school, and I think if you'd asked, my classmates, what do you value, they wouldn't have known how to answer that question. So you think by having the conversation earlier and continuously, you can sort of cultivate and develop that, and it's not just the 5 of you on the panel that had that early, but it's a lot more people, a lot more younger people can have that.
I think as a quick follow-up to that, a lot of people, and I'll even say myself included, graduate blind, because they think they might want to go into consulting or go into engineering or go into some title that they really don't know what it means. I mean, I've arguably been consulting for quite some time now. I'm still trying to figure out what consulting means. And so if we were to then substitute consulting with what consulting really meant and how that value is added from the individual to the organization or to the clients more so, that we can make better educated decisions about the careers that we want to go into for the right reasons, and then as a result ask the right questions when we're in those interviews to really extract the information we need to stay longer.
Right. Any other thoughts?
I think it's a great question. Go ahead. I was just saying, I think it's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot. I guess I would maybe love to hear from Andy about whether you think those skills can be taught, because Andy's in a special place where she's both been through the Watson model as a student and then also started Watson Institute in the Philippines to try to also teach those skills. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you, Andy, about whether you think those skills can be taught effectively.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. During my first semester at Watson University, I was definitely skeptical about, how do you actually teach empathy, or how do you actually teach grit and resilience and all these soft skills, I guess, that's often talked about, but then it's kind of hard. It's hard to grasp. And the thing is, I've actually seen it happen. I've seen it change within me, and I've taught it to other people as well. We previously had this curriculum called Transformative Action, and as an example, in terms of teaching empathy, it can be taught through games, like Crossing the Line, where we ask questions that people don't necessarily talk about. But so an example of a game would be Crossing the Line, and it's something as simple as asking questions as, are you Caucasian, or do you identify yourself as African American or Asian, and then having people cross a certain line within a room if they felt that they resonated with that. To going somewhere as deep as, do you suffer from a mental illness? So, or has your family ever gone through poverty? So asking these questions that demand vulnerability has allowed people a sense of empathy. It's something as simple as storytelling, and I think empathy is a muscle that you can practice, and it's a choice that you can do every single day. Another one would be resilience. At Watson, we have this game called Daring Greatly, where we ask young people, all these young entrepreneurs who are all afraid of rejection, to go out into the community and ask people crazy questions like, hey, can I borrow your shirt, or can I borrow your shoes, can I borrow your jacket, could I get a free meal at a restaurant? And it's this crazy training that allows you, that gets rid of your fear of rejection, because you always think that people are going to say no, and that's why you don't want to try. And then suddenly you go out into the community and say, hey, can I borrow your jacket, I'm really cold, and people say yes, and then you're like, oh, okay, people can say yes. Or even if they do say no, make it a fun competition, as in get a lot of young people to get as many no's as possible. So definitely these are things that can be taught, and a lot of them can be taught through games.
Yeah.
Yeah, that go ahead, Eric.
I would second that for sure. I think I definitely believe they can be taught. I think we've seen those skills develop in the students that we work with, and I think I've experienced that myself personally as well. I think that the difference is they aren't taught in the way that we think of teaching a skill. So this doesn't start with a PowerPoint and end with a test, for example, or it doesn't start with reading a textbook and end with a paper. The process of learning, kind of that learning journey, is very different, and it involves a lot of activities. Like Andy said, it involves a lot of practice, and so a lot of what Watson does is just create the space where students can go out and actually practice these skills. Because I think you ask the question, well, can you teach empathy? I think we all say, I'm not sure. But if you ask the question, can we practice empathy? I think everyone generally agrees that empathy can be practiced. It's a muscle, like Andy said. And so our version of teaching these skills is creating the space for students to practice resilience, empathy, creativity, and those types of skills.
Yeah, that's a very different concept of education, isn't it? It's at least compared to the to the classes I went to. So, Ariana, were you coming online?
Yeah, I think my mind is automatically starting to go to, I think a lot of what we're talking about is preparation before people enter the job market, so the right type of education, the right type of questions to be asking, exercises to do, and I'm thinking about for people who are already in the workplace, how can a company or an organization ensure that there are learning and development programs in place to bring these qualities out of people and make sure that individuals are really maximizing along some of these softer skills. And I can share one of the ways that LinkedIn has been successful in doing this is through building out a pretty robust learning and development program. And one of the courses that any LinkedIn employee can take is around conscious business management. And the whole premise of this course, and it's taught by Fred Kaufman, who currently heads up part of the people operations at LinkedIn, and he's written a book about this concept. It's all around how you can practice being conscious and compassionate in everything you do in the workplace. And so how can you really bring these skills across both your professional relationships and then your personal ones as well? And it's really all about understanding where the other person is coming from, having compassion, managing conflict, and resolving conflict through a very conscious, compassionate type of management. And so I found a huge amount of value out of this, and I already thought that I was approaching relationships in a very conscious, empathetic, and compassionate way. This course actually really taught me some more tactical things I can employ to really hone in and practice that soft skill.
You know, that's tremendous, and it seems like an example of the type of thing that's really important to create meaning in the workplace. You know, one thing that keeps employees at companies is their access to things like that. It sounds. I mean, just hearing you talk, I can see that has personal, emotional value to you beyond your work skills, etc. And have you seen other companies that are providing these types of things that employees see as almost personal benefits as well as professional training? Are you seeing a lot of that or more of that?
I'm starting to see more of it. I'm starting to see it in other tech companies in the area, certainly. If I'm thinking about it through the lens of nonprofit social enterprise, some of my more innovative clients are starting to build out, even if it's small, more grassroots effort, some form of a learning and development offering to their employees. I think the reason that it's so effective is not only because you hear employees like me speaking so passionately about it. It's something that's deeply affected me both professionally and personally, but because it is a clear indication that the company is investing back in you. One of the things LinkedIn says is that LinkedIn, they're not providing this so that you'll necessarily stay at LinkedIn, but if you can leave LinkedIn as a better professional than when you entered it, LinkedIn is accomplishing its goal of investing in its employees. And I love that. I feel like that's provided me with so much more inspiration and so much more loyalty to the company. And again, I've seen some of my more innovative nonprofit clients starting to play around with this, but it's not something that every single organization or company is doing where I think they should be.
Yeah, and it's easier, you talk about nonprofits with a lot less resources than a company like LinkedIn. It's easier to do it at a Google or a LinkedIn than it is at a 5-person nonprofit startup. I'm wondering if you or if others on the panel have seen ways for even the small startups, the small social enterprises, to give their teams access to some of this stuff. Obviously, it can't quite be as tailored as what you probably got at LinkedIn, but we're on a Google Hangout that's available to anybody in the world right now. And are we able to provide some of the training skills and insights to everybody, including the ones that don't have the privilege of working in Boulder or Palo Alto or Mountain View? What are we seeing? What are we seeing out there? I think
It's a bit of a misconception that good training and good opportunities mean high expense. I think that a lot of it can be organic mentorship that really occurs within that workplace too, that relationship building and that sense of community as well. It's no doubt that, you know, a nonprofit or a for-profit can be giving back plenty to its community, but in the event, or, you know, in the instance that finances are a little bit tight, there is always time that can be contributed as well. And so if there were to be events where managers would partner with juniors, juniors and juniors collaborating, or vice versa, in terms of, you know, seniors and managers collaborating, if people can have conversations and build relationships, really acknowledge success and reward just by recognition, I think that storytelling is a big way for people to feel a lot of value and a high sense of engagement within the workplace as well, and that of course is free. So if we can build those relationships and that sense of community outside of hours of work within the organization as well, I think there's a big opportunity for people to feel empowered, invested, and involved in the success of an organization, and then improve retention as a result in that sense as well.
Other thoughts from panelists of things they've seen that they thought were particularly effective and low cost, where you don't have to be in Palo Alto or Boulder or New York City? I was hoping that Rodney would come back on, and we're trying to get Rodney back on from New York. To see, I've been thinking increasingly of how to provide these types of opportunities to people outside of the bubble. Eric, either Eric, but I'm thinking Eric, you in Boulder, have you thought of, and maybe you're already doing this, but have you thought of packaging any of your training to make it available on the web for free or very low cost, or through inner-city schools?
Yeah, definitely. It's something we've thought a lot about and is on the horizon as something we would love to do for sure. I think, yeah, there are great ways to scale out what the type of training that we're doing, which you know, allows millennials to enter the social sector with the skills and preparation they need. And you know, a colleague of mine wrote a book about the millennial generation, David Burstein. He wrote the book Fast Future. He's a millennial. He wrote this book about the millennials. It's kind of, as I understand, it's one of the main books that's defined the millennial generation. And he speaks about how the millennial phenomenon is not something that's just an American phenomenon or even a Western phenomenon. But you know, my previous work is in Africa, and working with millennials in Uganda, and so many of the characteristics of the millennial generation in the States resemble the characteristics of the millennial generation in Uganda. And Andy, you could speak about the Philippines as well, but I think kind of Watson's strategy right now is to create a network of campuses in key cities around the world, so that really promising, hugely talented next generation entrepreneurs can get this training and to get this experience in their home countries, in their home cities, their home kind of communities, and then beyond that, scaling it out kind of in more of an open source way, probably through online, but that's still to be determined, so that really anyone could access it who wants to.
Yeah, that's Eric. I'm just looking at a question from another Eric online. He says, I come from Kenya, and I find getting employed here being so hard. How can I start my own initiatives in creation of employment? How do you know what type of education can get you there? And you know, the fact he's participating in this Google Hangout is in some ways historical. It's amazing that he can be writing this from Kenya and talking to people like you or people like us.
Especially when Rodney's having a hard time connecting from New York City.
I know, how ironic is that?
So
ironic is that, yeah.
I'd actually like to take a stab at this. I actually have currently a scholar in the Philippines who's from Kenya. His name is Brian Wanyama, and his venture is called Youth Light Kenya, which is lead, inspire, train, and educate. and empower. And the problem that he's trying to solve with his social venture is youth unemployment in Kenya. So for him, he's experienced what it was like to not be able to have access to opportunities and not have access to jobs. So instead of complaining about the system, he decided to just start his own social venture to help young people get employment. So I think in terms of what type of education can get you there, I think there's no really specific type. I know Eric studied biochemistry in college and then ended up working in the higher education sector and helping teach young young people in Uganda social entrepreneurship, and then went on to create a university for social entrepreneurs. I studied liberal arts and biology, and I don't think I'm really using anything I studied in biology in what I'm doing at Watson Institute. And I think really it's just about figuring out what your why is, what you're good at, and what you can create out of that.
That's great. Actually, I'm interested in what other people majored in, if you're willing to talk about it. And anybody want to talk about their background educationally? Because I get this question a lot. Believe it or not, even though I was an economist at the World Bank for many years, I was a religious studies major in undergrad, which is pretty much the least mathematical thing you could do. So so Andy, you were biology, and what did other people major in?
I graduated with a business degree and outsourced anything to do with business immediately as soon as we started the company.
Ariana, what's your educational background?
Yeah, I studied political economy with a minor in French.
Ah, oui, très bien. That's very, yeah, I get this question quite a bit, and my usual answer is that I meet people from so many different educational backgrounds, doing so many interesting things. So I always tell people, do what actually you like when you're in college, because it's a rare time where you can study anything you want and throw yourself into something interesting at that time. As you go into the workforce, somehow that will come in handy. I don't know if you do any work in France, Ariana, but if you ever do for LinkedIn, you could speak French, or you can read the French thing. Biochemistry, I think, Eric, are you biochemistry or biology? Think about how that relates to the emergence of networks and the emergence of life. Many insights you get from that. So many times people think they can find the secret of what they should major in, and that'll take them on the track in life, but I certainly haven't found that. So I have one more question from the online, and maybe we'll head toward a wrap-up after this. And when we wrap up, I'm just going to ask people, why are you doing what you're doing? So be thinking about your answer to that. Like, why are you here? Why are you on this Google Hangout? Why aren't you doing something that pays more or is more conventional, or et cetera? So get ready for that question, panelists. But let me ask this one concrete question that Felicia Lee has put up, and it's gotten a lot of votes. In many traditional businesses and organizations, decision-making power lies in more senior positions. What are the right questions for interviewees to ask to find out whether opportunities to create impact will be supported by their potential supervisors? So anyone want to take a shot at that? I know we've touched on part of that, but a lot of people, I think Felicia doesn't want to end up like me, where I literally didn't speak for the first 5 years in my first job because I was so intimidated. So what should I have asked, or what would you advise people to ask these days to get at that?
I can go first. I would say that when we're talking to the individual and really looking to extract potential out of them, or really benefiting the organization, or even staying a long time, I would ask really forward-oriented questions in that: where do you see yourself in this company in 5 years? Where do you see the company being in 5 years? How will you contribute to the success of the company in a longer period of time? How do you see yourself integrated with this, and what role do you want to play in the success of the organization? I mean, again, we've heard this a lot throughout the conversation, is that we're moving away from those skills questions. I mean, if we look at our backgrounds too, assuming that we do have the skills, whichever our resume or our grade point average will tell us we have, it becomes bigger than a skills question. It becomes more of an involvement, collaboration, and integration question. And so if we can look at what do you even do in your free time, and how does that relate to the company? How do you see the company really integrating with you outside of the 9 to 5 hours that you may be asked to participate in? So again, it would be about how people value their time at work, how they're going to be integrated into it, and how they see really making a positive change to the organization or really helping the organization move forward in a longer period of time.
Anyone else? And is it kosher, by the way, is it kosher to call up other people during an interview process, people who work there, and ask them questions like this, or is that not kosher? How do you know whether the guy or the woman who's interviewing you is just giving you BS and assuring you you'll have a lot of power and authority?
I think one other thing I'd add to what Eric has said is to ask about the company's values. Most organizations, big or small, have some set of values that they come back to you. I think that can be very telling, because a lot of times those values are, they trickle down into the actual operations of the way that the organization or the business is run, and they're instilled in every single employee, regardless of how high up you are. And so that's something that I would think to ask, and I would ask for concrete examples as well of how the person who's interviewing has experienced those values embodied in something they've been able to accomplish at the organization. I do love this question, though. It's forcing me to think a little bit more about how you would phrase things in the right way, in the right kind of sensitive way in an interview process. It is tricky.
Yeah, I think it's a good question as well. I'll jump in quickly, and I think my perspective is maybe just that if you feel intimidated to ask, then it's probably not a good sign about whether you'll be able to have that type of relationship with your supervisor that you want to have. So hopefully the organization will have set up the culture of the interview in a way where you would feel completely comfortable asking that kind of question, or maybe you wouldn't even need to ask it because it would be so self-apparent. And if you feel intimidated to ask, maybe that's somewhat of a flag to look into more about their culture. Sorry, I didn't think I cut you off there.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. I think as personally, as someone that has both looked for a job and then as someone that's currently hiring right now, while I was looking for a job, I definitely tried to talk to as many people within the organization about, first of all, who was interviewing me and what she was like, or he or she was like, but also what were the challenges of the organization, and then during the interview try and present strategies that I've already come up with, but do it in a way that's not offensive. I think humility is something that is super important, both on the interviewee and the interviewer side. As someone that's currently in a very early stage social enterprise, I also have to have the humility to be able to take people in that are better than me, because it's the only way for us to grow. And to want to hire people that can do things that I can't do. And be open to criticism. Maybe not on the interview while you're interviewing, but I think definitely once you start working with someone, you have to be vulnerable enough to be open with your team about the things that you're being challenged by. And I think in terms of cultural fit, you want to have someone that is empathetic and understands, or sympathetic and understands where you're coming from, but at the same time refuses to lower the standards to which your organization should aspire to, and begins to use the we language instead of a you language, as in you leading the organization, and instead say, we as a team, this is what we can do.
Yeah, this we thing has really made a big impression on me. So, some of the words that people have been using, it's interesting. It's this balance and this mix between how do you move into your bigness with humility and vulnerability. And it's almost like bigness on the one hand and humility and vulnerability on the other hand. These are very different things, and we often consider them in opposition to each other. And yet this conversation reminds me that it's somehow mixing those together and balancing those together, that's part of the secret sauce. Well, we're almost at time here, and there are so many more things I'd love to talk about. I have a list of 5 or 10 more questions, but we're coming up to the top of the hour, and so I want to put you each on the spot just for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or you can pass if you want, and just ask you why you're doing this. You could be doing things that pay more, that are probably easier, etc. But somehow each of you has chosen an unorthodox path to try to make the world better. And is it because you're just a good person, or is it what's at play there? So I'll just throw it out there and see who wants to bite. Eric, you're up. Eric in Calgary.
Okay, well, it might take a little more than 5 seconds, but at the same time, what I would say is that right now, I firmly believe that Gen Y Inc., my team and myself, have the ability to shape the way that people work, or the way that people are attracted to work. And if people are more fulfilled in their jobs, then they're more fulfilled in their lives too. Because if work is something that we do for the majority of our time, in some cases more than we sleep, and we can help people be attracted to positions that are better fit for them and ideally making them happier at work, then we're making them happier in their lives as well. And I think there's a big opportunity there to make a big difference.
Great. Ariana, welcome back. We're just closing here with remarks from each person on why the heck you're doing what you're doing. Why aren't you doing something that's more orthodox? What drives you to do this? So.
Yeah, I think my answer to that would be nothing is more energizing and exciting to me than thinking of ways to help individuals reach their fullest potential. And I think the only way they can do that is through gaining the skills, education, the knowledge, and the networks that are going to help get them there. And oftentimes there are barriers to that success, be it economic backgrounds, where you come from, not having that a mentor or someone to help guide you in that journey. And so I think if we can find platforms to reach people and to help them to do that, that's what I'd like to spend my life doing. So
energizing, you said energizing. So it's not this is not a hair shirt that you're wearing, it's fun. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Andy, how about you?
It's definitely a question I ask myself every day, and when it gets hard, I ask myself, why am I doing this? I could go into consulting, or I could go into a job that's a lot easier, but I think for me personally, it comes from personal pain, and it comes from personal experience. I was lucky. I was born in the United States, but I grew up in the Philippines, and when I was growing up, I had friends who had to drop out of school to start working and help their families, and to me that was just so painful for me to see growing up. And I think a lot of why I do this is because of love, because I saw a lot of young people have so much talent but then zero opportunity to fulfill their potential. And also when I moved to the States and I went to community college, I didn't really have any opportunities to fulfill my own potential. I think I was really lucky that I found Watson University, and Watson gave me access to mentors. Eric has provided a huge network that has allowed me to do this work, and it's incredible and privilege. And I think one of my biggest dreams come true is we have found someone from the Philippines named Paulo. He's the son of a farmer and a public school teacher, and now he's going to Watson University in Boulder in the fall. And I think that's an incredible story for someone to come from rural Philippines and then go all the way to Boulder, and he's also starting a social enterprise. It's these ripple effects, and I would just hope that basically for me, I want to wake up every day knowing that I have purpose and meaning in my life, and it's amazing that I get to live that out every single day through the Institute.
Eric, we're going to end with you. I want to go to Watson. I keep hearing so many good things about Watson. I don't know why I'm not there. So, why are you doing it? Eric, you're muted. Hang on just a second. Let's see if we can get you unmuted.
All right.
There we go. Okay.
We would love to have you, Dennis, but I think the real answer to that question is probably a longer conversation, as you can imagine. But for me, I have to go back to 2002, and I was in a refugee community in western Uganda and met some incredible next generation leaders from this refugee community who came from the Congo and had a vision to solve the conflict that they had been forced to flee from in the Congo. And it was clear to me that if anyone was going to be able to make a difference in this conflict, it was them, because they were more motivated than anyone else. And their families had lost their lives in it, and they knew these communities better than anyone else because it's their own communities. And so I said, you know, what can I do to help? And they said, well, the best way to help our community and the best way to help our country is to help us receive an education. And those words have really stuck with me about what the purpose of an education, a true education, should be. And I think education started out with that in mind, that an education should be about building the community, about building the country. But I think that education over the years has drifted away from that. And so much of my why, so much of why I believe in what Watson is doing is because we're trying to provide a model of education that helps this generation, invest in this generation, to then make the world a better place for the generations to come.
That's great. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's fantastic. So, well, thanks to you all. I want to thank American Express for sponsoring this boot camp series and Google Hangouts. Ashoka Changemakers for inviting us all to be part of it. I've learned a huge amount in the last hour and a half, and I hope all of our online viewers have as well. I'm pretty sure this is going to be available, this video, recorded video, will be available on changemakers.org going forward. So if you have some friends or colleagues or someone you know that would benefit from this, send them to changemakers.org, and this should be available online. So thank you all very much, and I hope to run into you all in person sometime.
Thank you for your time, Dennis.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. All right. Have a great day.